Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast, where we have conversations with guests about their life, loss, grief, and of course, grief dreams, which can be dreams of the deceased. If you want to know more about the topic and your hosts, please visit our website at griefdreams.ca.
To support our podcast, please go ahead and rate it. For additional ways to support us, please refer to our show notes. Before we move on with the show, we'd like to give a territory acknowledgement. Long before Canada was formed, the Stalo people were the original land stewards, and they have lived here since time immemorial. They continue to live in the unceded Stalo territory, known to settlers as the Fraser Valley and Lower Fraser Canyon of British Columbia. We recognize and honor the contribution that Indigenous people have made and continue to make to our community and the topic of grief dreams.
Hey, welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. On the show today, we have myself, Joshua, and Jade as your hosts, alongside our guest, Parvati Markus. And so Parvati is the author of Whisper in the Heart, the ongoing presence of Neem Karoli Baba, which was released this year, and Love Everyone, the transcendent wisdom of Neem Karoli Baba told through the stories of Westerners through lives he's transformed. And that came out in 2015. With Radha Baum, she is the co-author of the children's book, Isabella Castaspella, love the name, The Happy Little Witch and Her Friends, and that just also came out this year too. So she's been busy. And then she's also been midwifing spiritually oriented nonfiction books and memoirs as a developmental editor and writer since her efforts with Ram Dass's classic, Be Here Now. She has also helped with spiritual organizations as a past president of the Neem Karoli Baba Ashram and the Hanuman Temple in Taos, New Mexico, and events as a developmental consultant for the Global Peace Initiative of Women. She is on the advisory board of the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation and lives in Los Angeles near her 2 sons and 3 granddaughters. So welcome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
I'm delighted to be here.
So what's it like having 2 publications in 1 year?
Total insanity. Do not launch 2 books at once. That's all I can tell you. Especially, seemingly such different ones, So it's been quite interesting.
I was really happy to hear that you did release I haven't read the Isabella one yet. I will, but the ones on Maharaji, I remember reading your original book in 2015 and I really kept it with me. And every time I would travel, I'd bring it with me and just read some of the stories in there. And then when this new one came out and then it talked about dreams, I'm like, we got to have you on this podcast because it's always something I like hearing about. And Mirabai Bush, who came on our show, talked about a grief dream she had of Maharaji that really helped her when she was stressed and taking, I guess, life too seriously. He was like, I don't know, Jade, if you remember, he was playing. So she was at this river or something. And then he was playing in the water. He's wearing a bathing suit that he would normally, that was in plaid, the blanket. Yeah, the blanket, but it was in his bathing suit. And so he was frolicking in the water and just having fun. And so she woke up from that and just basically said her decision that she was planning on making, it's okay and not take it too seriously. We'll talk about also mine and Jade's dreams, Maharaji too, that have been, I think, impactful for us along the way. And so, so when it came out, I'm like, we gotta, know more about what's going on here and also just talk to you because any time I get a chance to talk about the subject, it always warms my heart because really Jade's the only one I talk about the subject.
Well, let me explain a little bit, first of all, about the difference between the 2 books, between Love Everyone and Whisper in the Heart. Okay. In Love Everyone, I interviewed about 70 of the Westerners who had been to India and been with Maharaji in the body during, those early years of 71, 72, 73. And then he left his body on, September 11th, 1973. And a Whisper in the Heart, so those are all sort of first-person experiences with Maharaji in Love Everyone. Then when we get to Whisper in the Heart, what happened is after Love Everyone came out, people kept coming up to me and going, well, I just met Maharaji, and this is what happened. And so Whisper in the Heart are stories from about 150 people, different ways in which they have, quote, met Maharaji since he left his body. So, it sort of spreads this out. And one of the big ways people do meet him is through dreams. And these are not the dreams that are sort of that your day-to-day runoff, where I find myself editing books at night, in my sleep. This is darshan. And darshan means being in the presence of either a being or a deity or whoever it is that represents the divine for you, and being in the presence of that unconditional love. And it's beyond what people think of as a dream. It's actually more real than what you feel is real in your day-to-day life. And you probably had that experience yourself when you dreamt about Maharaji, a feeling of being in the presence of this being. And so I wanted people to understand that when we're talking about these dreams, these are darshan dreams. What they can do is relieve the grief or relieve the separation that you feel or relieve they're a blessing. They're a grace that happens. Do you want to tell about your dream?
Well, first, I think it's important to tell people maybe that don't know Maharaji, who Maharaji was and how you met him.
Oh, well, that's a story. Okay, we have to go back to the 60s and remembering what the 60s were like for those who remember. And for those who don't, well, you've heard about it. It's all true. Basically, what happened, a very brief version of it, is that at 1969, I took acid for the first time and had an experience of oneness. And as I came down from the trip, somebody handed me the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And as I read it over the next few days going, yeah, that's sort of exactly what happened. Very interesting. Three weeks later, I was at a party and there, with a bunch of educators from Goddard College, as a matter of fact. And in the corner was a guy playing a guitar. So that's where I headed. And he said, hey, you want to go meet a saint? Now, 3 weeks before I took the acid, I would have said, forget it. They don't exist. What are you talking about? But because of that acid trip, I was able to say, sure, let's go see who the saint is. And we drove down to New Hampshire to Ram Dass's father's farm. Ram Dass, for those who don't know, was once Richard Alpert, and he and this guy named Timothy Leary were both kicked out of Harvard for the experiments they were doing with psychedelics with students. So, and Leary went off to become the, tune in, turn on, drop out guru of LSD. And Richard went to India, met this being Maharaji, and became Ram Dass, the servant of God. So when I met Ram Dass in 1969, he had just come back, a year earlier from meeting Maharaji for the first time. And he was glowing. He was absolutely radiant. I had never seen anybody like that. And he was standing there as we drove up the driveway to his father's farm. And I was shocked. I couldn't even speak. All I could see was light. And I was straight. I hadn't smoked anything. I hadn't dropped anything. I was straight, and all I could see was light coming from him. To make a long story short, everybody I met there were only about a dozen people there at the time. But every one of them, it was like, where do I know you from? Where did you go to school? Where did you go to camp? Why do I know you? And these are the people like Krishna Das and Rameshwar Das and all these other people that are still my closest family, so to speak. So it's sort of, I had found my tribe. They were strange people walking around going, namaste. I didn't know what they were talking about. It was, but I knew I belonged there. And 3 days, I moved right in. And 3 days later, I became Ram Dass's secretary, snail mail days. He had been lecturing around the country and people were writing letters and he was responding to their letters. So I'd listen to the tapes, of him responding to these letters and type them up. And this is how I sort of learned the vocabulary of my new life and, learned the concepts and learned what was going on. And at the end of that summer, any of us wanted to do was to go to India to find this Maharaji. Ram Dass wasn't telling us his name or where he was because we wanted to get whatever Ram Dass had gotten from where he had gotten it. Have I diverged from your question? What was the question?
It was how you met him.
How I met Maharaji. Right. I told you it was a long story. So anyway, after that summer with Ram Dass, Ram Dass went off to Lama Foundation, which had no phones at the time. There was no way of getting in touch with him. I hadn't yet met the person who became sort of my first meditation teacher. And I was visiting with a college friend, and we split a tab of acid. The next day, I was still not totally down. And I was going to weird astral places and getting scared. And I had this little picture of Maharaji that Ram Dass had given me. So I sat in front of this picture with my mullah going, I'm scared and you've got to help me. That was my mantra. I'm scared and you've got to help me. That's why there's a section in Whisper called Cry for Help. And this little picture started glowing in like blue light. And I could see Maharaji behind it. And it was just for a second, but it was like enough for me to lie down and go through whatever else I had to go through, and everything was okay. Well, needless to say, after that, I got a larger picture of Maharaji, and I basically lived my life in front of that picture, and talked to it all the time. And when I finally got to India and I finally got to Maharaji, one of the first things he said to me was, "You used to talk to my picture all the time," he said. "You asked many questions." Needless to say, I had never told anyone I talked to pictures, because back then you just didn't do that. So anyway, I met Maharaji through meeting Ram Dass. And it was extraordinary. By that time, of course, there were a lot of, quote, gurus from the East that were coming to the West. It was just sort of this beginning of this influx of Eastern teachings coming to the West. I know I had spent time with Swami Muktananda. I had spent time with a lot of different beings. And with all of them, I felt like something must be wrong with me. My heart just isn't open. There's something wrong with me. I can't bow before them comfortably. I can't touch their feet. I can't, something very reluctant in that. And when I got to India, I saw Satya Sai Baba, who was another one. Here was the avatar. And again, something's wrong with me. I can't open up to this being. The moment I was in front of Maharaji, there was no question. I mean, surrender is not something you make happen. It's something that is. When you finally find the place that is home.
Incredible. So incredible. So wow. So, like, no precursor for you prior to taking the acid. And would you say that the use of the acid is the catalyst for that? Or,
well, you got to remember.
How do you make sense of that now? Like, I know you're saying the 60s, and you're saying 3 weeks ago, I would have never even.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to remember, I grew up in the 50s and early 60s. I mean, it was a time of very conformist and very non-spiritual. I mean, I grew up Jewish in a very non-religious home, never went to temple, never did anything. I had no relationship to religion, to spirit. I was very involved in art, which to me was the place that, felt like I was getting some nourishment from, but not from any other direction. And it was only when this sort of new wave of consciousness exploded in America. We sort of needed back then the LSD to break through that very rigid and non-interesting thinking that was predominant at that time. Nowadays, you don't. I mean, nowadays, there's a place you can go meditate in every podunk town in America. There's yoga studios on every corner. It's very different. There are tons of books. Back then, there were only a handful.
Yeah,
so,
I think that's very interesting. So it's a gateway. It was
a gateway for most of us that were there at that time. That to sort of break through that old thinking and allow in this new concept of consciousness and awareness and the Eastern teachings that in the West, I mean, I had gone to a college that prided itself on its liberal education. And, we had to take 2 years of a very intensive course called Western Civilization. We used to call it Dead White Men. It was, so I mean, I had taken courses on the Bible in college, more from a literature standpoint, because I was an English major, but it didn't speak to me.
Sure. Sure. And I think it's important to note too that, those doorways are different for, everybody. Like I grew up in the 80s and I found that like the use of drugs and acid pulled me away from, you know what I mean? Like it was a barrier for me. It was not conducive. Like when when I'm in that stage of my life where I'm exploring, that has a very like kind of not liberating energy for me around it. And as I got older, I realized this is not conducive to opening up. In fact, I feel more open when I'm far away from those things. And I wonder if that's because I hear a lot about that in the 60s, and I know it's highly personal either way. And so, people have different journeys, but I hear that a lot from people saying in the 60s that, taking acid and doing mushrooms or, any kind of
anything that got you beyond your mind.
That's right. Yeah.
That was really what it was. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But now it's not necessary. As I said, we didn't even have the concept of mindfulness.
Right.
We didn't have any of that. So finding it was just so exciting.
Sure.
And so liberating.
Absolutely.
That, it was extraordinary.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And today, a lot of these in the stories in Whisper in the Heart, there are still some people that are using medicine, as it's called now, plant medicine, to open up things. And as you see in their stories, they then go beyond that because at a certain point, it may provide an opening, but it's not the sustainer that's going to walk you down the path.
100%. Yeah. Me and Josh have talked about that a lot and saying you can come in, but you can't stay. I mean, which is great. Some people need that quick vision to like, oh, this is here. But I think where we get into problems now, and I see this with people using plant medicine a lot, is they begin to kind of integrate it being a long-term strategy, and that's not sustainable. Like, you know what I mean? You can't maintain that, or it's going to be difficult, I should say, to maintain that for the long term, and you're going to have to be kicked out. Yeah.
Ram Dass always used to say, you use a method for as long as it works for you, and then you throw it out.
Right.
That's, it's a method.
Beautiful advice.
Yeah.
We love that.
Yeah.
And so one of my questions, since like you got to be in the presence of Maharaji, which I think a lot of people maybe envy or are a little jealous of, but what was that like? And then what did you see when he died with the devotees? Because I think that's interesting when like such a being has such an impact in someone's life to not have that anymore. Because then you have like me and Jade who never knew the body per se. And so we developed this relationship with that. And so we never actually had to deal with that kind of grief that you and all the others around. So could you talk a little bit about that? I think that's kind of interesting.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, I wouldn't trade anything in the world for my time with Maharaji in the body. And I was very attached to that body. I had to be holding his feet. I had to be rubbing his legs. I had to be like there. I mean, even today, I can go into an incredible state with Maharaji just by remembering the feel of the fringes of the blanket. I mean, it's that tactile. My memory of him, is a tactile one. Through touching his feet, through touching the blanket, through that type of thing. And so when that physicality is gone, there's no choice but to get it internally, and there was, of course, tremendous grief in losing the physical connection. I mean, we thought he was eternal. We thought he'd always be there. When we came back to America, it was like, okay, we're going to get healthy again. I mean, a year in India will do that to you. And and then we're going to go back to India and be with Maharaji. We're going to do that our whole lives. We're going to come back to America, do our lives, go back to India. And then, of course, he upped and left. But then it turns out he just didn't go very far. As all these stories show, that he's still there. I mean, for many of us, we went through lots of grief. I mean, Krishnadas talks about it a lot, about how depressed he was for 10 years, really. until he realized that the only way to get himself out of it was to sing with people, and that's what sort of put him on his path. For me, it was constantly hearing people's stories and then thinking, well, let's gather these before, first of all of us are gone. And second of all, because that's really what we did in India when we were with Maharaji. I mean, during the time we were with him, it was just sort of hanging out. He didn't teach. He didn't lecture. You had crazy conversations about the price of milk in America or about, it didn't matter. It was just this. And the reality was just sitting in the love. That was the reality. It was just sitting in it.
I think that's really interesting point, because I think even for me, you get this kind of whimsical idea of like, I'm shocked to hear you talking about the price of milk. I mean, it's like normal humanist stuff and chit chat and the banter. And so like what I'm hearing you say is those teachings, they're unsaid teachings, and they're kind of between the lines, and they're kind of given in the silence. And so I think me would have an idea that, yeah, you're being like lectured to, or, the parables are being relayed to you, or you're having these like kind of stringent educational sessions or something on how to love everybody and serve everybody. And so like, would you say that those teachings were given in a way energetically, or?
And by example, too.
Example.
We spent a lot, we were really taken in by the Indian devotees, by Maharaji, and their families, and seeing these people who had been with Maharaji for 40 years, and listening to their stories and just being gathered in to this community of love, and seeing family in a different way than what we in America sort of experienced it as, what Ram Dass used to call family of the heart, as opposed to our blood families, right? Sorry, I lost my track again.
That's okay. That's okay. You answered the question. I mean, it's modeling. They were modeling for you,
right? How
they were loving each other in your presence, and
exactly,
and you learned from that.
Yeah, and also Maharaji, would do things. I mean, it wasn't all about the price of milk, but sure. he didn't lecture like,
do
this is what you, this,
yes.
He didn't expect us to meditate. He didn't, he said we were good for the 5-limbed yoga, not the 8-limbed yoga. The 5-limbed yoga, which is, I can't say it in Hindi, but it's eating, drinking chai, walking to and fro, gossiping, and sleeping. That's the 5-limbed yoga we were good for. He said the only thing that matters in this day and age is connecting to the name of God. The only thing he ever had people do was either the Hanuman Chalisa, which is this 40-verse prayer in Hindi to Hanuman, who's the monkey god that serves Ram, and service. Service became a very big thing. I mean, just naming Ram Dass, Das is servant, so it's servant of God. And he gave many of the boys Das names, sort of the Das family, and that all relates to service. Somebody would ask him, well, how should I meditate? And he'd say, meditate like Christ. When he was hung on the cross, he felt no pain, only love. Sure, that's how I'm going to meditate.
That's a tall order.
It wasn't like, go to Goenka and, take 10 courses in mindfulness and Vipassana. He didn't push us to do anything other than, it's like the Dalai Lama saying, my religion is kindness. It was, how do you live your life? Not, go be a yogi in a cave. And his devotees, many of those long-term devotees of his were married. They had families. They were not yogis. That's why the movie Brilliant Disguise, because the person they're talking about, this man, K.C. Tiwari, who was one of Maharaji's long-term devotees, he was a school teacher. He was married. He had children, seemed to be living a normal human life. But on the click of a hat, snap of a fingers, he could go into samadhi. So his disguise may have been that of a householder, but he was truly a very adept yogi. And that's what Maharaji sort of wanted us to know, that we didn't have to be a certain way. We didn't have to do certain things. We had to basically open your heart and love and be kind and serve.
That's beautiful. So what I'm hearing is like part of the grief process or the grief journey that many went through is to continue to serve and
or to find their way to do it. Yeah.
To find their way again to do it. And then also to like for you, it's like to hear these stories like they're, and I think it's interesting. We don't, I'm trying to look back at like how important that is, but to hear other people's stories or even to share your own, what that can do in the process of remembering and continuing that bond. And just, I think it's like just to remember aspect of it all.
Well, when you tell your story, you have the experience of being seen, of being heard at the place of what's important to you. So it serves you to do that, and it serves others. By the time you've read 150 people's tales in Whisper of the Heart about having met Maharaji, you begin to have a feeling for what that means. You begin to go, well, that's happened to me. I've looked at a picture and felt like I felt a presence there. I've been sitting and singing in kirtan and, felt my heart open. I've had a dream in which I've seen a being that I felt blissful having that experience. And so it strengthens your faith. It strengthens the awareness that you have that there's more than meets the eye, shall we say. There's more than this physical plane reality. Thank goodness.
It's interesting, like saying like in the book, right? There's just so many ways people found that. And it's not just one. And I wanted to ask you, since this is a Grief Dreams podcast, have you ever had a dream of Maharaji? I didn't see it in the book.
I have not had a dream of him, certainly since he left his body, which I certainly wanted and still do. Okay. But when I was in India with him, I would dream of him at night. It was sort of like I felt like I was with him continuously. It was, there was just like no let up in that presence, which was just absolutely wonderful. Yeah. I mean, there were people like Mirabai you were talking about who had a dream that really helped get her out of her grief. I wish I'd had that. But I hadn't. But there's certainly in the book so many stories of people's dreams and how important they were in people's lives. I mean, a dream can change the entire direction of your life.
That's what I found fascinating when I was reading the dreams. That was a continuing theme that people sort of had, was that there's this love that was present that they needed to feel in one way or another, or they reminded what love was, but also the life-changing aspects of it. I think that's so beautiful just when looking at the power of some of these moments in someone's life. And I think like what we do here is just raising awareness on why can't we talk about these powerful moments? Like, why are we ashamed to in some way or afraid to? Like, they're changing us. Like, we should be like shouting from the mountains. Like, well, I had this dream.
Right. Yeah. Oh God, I know. But, people are much more willing to share that now. I mean, it's becoming a more open type of experience, something that I don't think people are being shamed for in any way. No. It's just people may disbelieve you, or they may go, it was a dream. What do you know? No big deal. But it is a big deal. The thing is, that love, that unconditional love is an experience we don't usually have here in the West, or where you have a relationship with somebody where there is literally no condition put on that love, on both the love that you're giving and the love you're receiving. It's just there. It's just its own essence, so to speak. And that Maharaji knows everything about, at least we did. I mean, just like he said, you used to talk to my picture all the time. You asked many questions. Well, if he knew that about me, obviously he knew everything else too. And he showed us that over and over again in many small ways. A friend would come in one day, after having had a big fight with her husband, and Maharaji would say something to her about, you didn't offer me your toast this morning. Well, if he knew that you didn't offer your toast that morning, then he certainly knew she'd had a big fight with her husband. But that didn't get mentioned. But knowing that he knows literally everything about you and still totally loves you unconditionally with no judgment whatsoever is something that's very hard for people to understand. But they can get a glimpse of that space when they've had darshan in a dream.
How beautiful.
Kate, I think it's a good time for you to chat about your dream.
Sure. Yeah, I'll share my dream. I just want to say before that, what a scary sentiment to be exposed and having somebody have awareness about your life that you might not be openly prepared to share. But in the same breath, what a relief. What a relieving place to be. That is free of distress. And it's like, well, I'm exposed and here I am and I'm still loved. And it's just, you can feel the weight of being proper just kind of move off you. So that's a beautiful thought. I really love that thought. Yeah, my dream I've only ever had one dream of Maharaji, and it was in 2015. And I was not in a beautiful spot in my life. I had many questions about recent decisions I've made and where I was going and how I was going to get out of this web that I was in that I didn't want to be in. And I didn't know the way out. What's interesting was that it was on my birthday that I had the dream. And I wasn't in my home. I was actually in a hotel, but the dream was, it was at night and I was walking through this alleyway and it was like a war zone. Like there was just chaos and there was a riot. There was people flipping cars. There was burning buildings, very thick smoke in the air, just chaos, violence, chaos, just really hyper, very stimulated, and just walking and feeling just feeling of anxiety of like, how am I going to get out there? And what we know about our dream research and everything, that those things often, mimic our waking life. And so, like you say, like the daily runoff. And so that was likely indicative of just how I was interpreting what I was dealing with, maybe to the, extreme. But I ran down an alleyway and there was a little wood kind of raggedy hut to my left. And I kind of ducked in the door and I went in and it was completely dark, but it was peaceful in there. And I remember thinking when I went in the door, oh, I have a reprieve, like I'm safe. Naive of me to think this little raggedy hut was going to protect me in a war zone, but a riot outside. But I was thinking, oh, I'm safe here. And then I looked in the corner and there was kind of like a bench built all around the hut. And Maharaji was sitting in the corner in the shadows and barely any light, but I could see almost like a sliver of his face. And I moved closer and I sat on the bench next to him. And I didn't say like, help me, like get me out of this riot, but I was conveying it with my eyes. That was the feeling in the dream. I sat down and there was a blanket there and I pulled it over my legs, but the bottom of my legs were sticking out. And he reached out to touch my leg and I pulled my foot under the blanket, like how I would read in the books that he used to do, kind of tease the people. So I did that. Mm-hmm. And he said, you don't want me to touch your leg? And I said, yeah, I do. And I pulled the blanket back out, like in the dream, I'm thinking, I'm not missing this opportunity. Yes, I do. But that witty repartee of like, and I have nothing to go on. Like, I don't even know. I've read in books that that's what he used to do. So I was kind of, giving him a taste of his own medicine, I guess. And so, yeah, I said, yes, I do. And so he reached out and touched my leg and he looked me in the eyes and he said with his finger up, all you have to remember is the dove of hope. And I didn't know what that meant, but I woke up and of course I was feeling elated and incredibly relaxed. And I didn't know what that meant. Me and Joshua have talked about it a lot ad nauseum, but we, trying to make sense, like, okay, he wants me to be hopeful. And I assume that that's in relation to eventually this riot and war zone will cease. And so that's 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 7 years ago, 6 years ago, I can see maybe how that's I can definitely see how the dove of hope has kind of come. And so me and Josh have talked about, in the Bible, how they send the dove out, and, Noah's Ark, they want it to bring back a branch, sign of land.
And it's also always a symbol of peace, the dove.
Yeah.
So he's bringing peace to that chaos.
Remember the dove of hope. Yeah. And the dove came back with a branch and, shift upwards, but it took a long time right. between the dream and a feeling in my life where I thought, I'm out of the web.
But the dream has stayed with you.
I've never forgotten the dream.
That's one of the ways that you know that this was darshan, that you were in the presence of, is because it left such a powerful imprint on you.
Yes. And it's funny. So when I told Mirabai about the dream as well, and she's like, well, I said, I don't know what it means, Mirabai, but like, I'm holding on to the promise. And this was before the upward shifts that I've experienced since our last conversation, in-depth conversation. And she said, try to draw a dove. And I'm like a horrible artist. It's not my thing. And so I remember calling Josh and being like, I don't know. And I'm like YouTubing like how to draw a dove. She said, paint it and stuff. And so there's paper on the ground. I was like, I can't draw a dove. Like, do I really need to do this? Is this the key to understanding what it is? But I think, all the nuances I don't fully get. But I think according to just our interpretation of what a dove means and, those kind of the scriptures and the symbol of hope, I think has been helpful. And I'm under the impression that there's more to come. That dove is bringing more, like I'm still in the space where I'm remembering the dove of hope. And I believe there's more peace to come, and
there is.
I would say it's like top. I had a dream of Ram Dass as well. And that was a powerful dream, but definitely at the top, and has stuck with me all this time.
A lot of the dreams that count in the book, he's clearing up people's confusion. Sometimes when people have met Maharaji, they've already been involved with another guru, another teacher, and may have they grew up, in a fairly religious setting, and so Christ has always been, at the forefront. And so they have a conflict of, well, what do I do now with this Baba in the blanket, compared to, this other person I've been, using as my representation of the divine, right? And he'll frequently come in dreams and show himself merging or sitting side by side with this other being to show them that it's sub-ek, it's all one. That's what he came back to over and over and over again. It's all one, sub-ek. Yeah. And there's some powerful dreams where he, showing somebody that, yes, the place in you that finds that in Mayor Baba can also find it in me, and we're the same place.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that, because I, have, like, with a lot of things in the relationship and the curiosity and the draw, I felt like I haven't really had a choice. Like, it's just like, okay, this is what we're doing now, and this is where your heart is, and you feel connected to this, but I can't. And it's interesting. I have other times earlier, like when I have like your little puja in your house and you have a picture, and then like the cable guy comes and you like flip the picture down because you think, like it's not Jesus, it's, because I don't want Shaw Cable to know, I have this, you're going to say like, who's this man or the monkey statue, and then the humor of that is like, this is what I'm using to get to where I need to be. And it's like, but it's not like how my grandparents grew up in organized Christianity, and you could have Jesus on the cross all over your house and it's nothing. And so, I get what you're saying, Sabik. And so it's my own challenge, and I say, Maharaji, sorry, I got to put you down. I'm not in a place of readiness, and I can hear it, like the laughter, right? Like whatever you need. He doesn't care.
He doesn't care. No.
Do whatever you want with me. That's on you. So, the ownership, I'm like, one day I'll get to a place that I'll be able to have your picture. And me and Josh have talked about this a lot, but
right.
Finding that space. And Josh, you have a really cool Maharaji dream. Would you like to share it quickly?
Yes. Yeah. So I've only had one, sort of like you, Jade. My PhD was just a difficult journey that, people just don't know. You don't talk about it. They see that you have this thing and that's all they see, but they don't understand the journey. And so to then find a place that felt like home, I had to sort of come to British Columbia. And so I took a risk. This is what the story's about. So I took a risk. I quit my job during the pandemic. I was working in Ontario, and then just to come out here, it just felt right. And everyone thought it was crazy to do that, to not have anything lined up. And then I came down here, and within 2 weeks, I had a job in the field that I've always wanted to have a job in. And it provided consistency. It provided enough financial stability to help me work through the debt that I had, and also prepare and to save for the future and to buy new clothes, like all the sort of stuff that I've always kind of wanted to be able to do. And then to be able to do that, and then to continue to do the bereavement research. It's not on dreams specifically, but they do come up, but it's on how people's support has changed throughout the pandemic. So I get to serve in a way that I was serving prior and actually get paid for it. So like how amazing that is. And then to be in this place with mountains and water, and it's just like a breath of fresh air. And I felt a lot of, like we were talking before, just trauma almost like settling, or like the pain, like, and the fears just settling down. So anyways, the dream I had was I was talking, I think it was to Jade was there, and then there was someone else and I was talking to, and then there's Maharaji to the left of me. And then I was talking to this person. I said, yes. And then like I moved here. I was talking about the story of moving from Ontario to here. And then he was just cracking up. It was just like he thought it was the funniest story ever. And then I looked at him and I just knew what he was laughing at. And it was the word I. And then I started laughing. I thought it was the funniest thing too. And then I went back to the person and carried on the conversation. And then the word I came up again. And then he started cracking up and I started cracking up. And then we just started like laughing, and the conversation just stopped. And then he came over to me, and then I hugged him. I got the chance to actually like touch him for like the first time. And he felt like a Squishmallow stuffed animal that's like out there now. Anyways, he felt like that because I just recently that day went to like Toys R Us and felt one for the first time. And so it felt like that. Like there's no bones. It's just like this, like, and then it was just and it was a beautiful moment. I woke up, I'm just like, wow. And then I still to this day, like look at that dream, and it helps me take the pressure off myself in a lot of ways, and to just surrender to what's going on in these moments. That it's bigger, it's bigger than me, and it's okay to have fun, to stay in joy, to play, to not take life as seriously as I once was. And that dream, I look at that and it's just like, I'm like, where's the I in this? Just like enjoy this. And so it just makes you also sit in that mystery of what life is. And so I love it. I love the energy of that dream. But yeah, it was a great moment.
I can imagine. That's wonderful. It reminds me of a story actually that I do tell in the book, just about how he knows what you need. The way he knows that you needed to lighten up. So, that's what happened. You lightened up from being able to sit there and laugh with him, right? I was back in India, I was smoking these awful little cigarettes called beedies. They're just a betel leaf wrapped around some very low-grade tobacco. They're horrible. But I was doing them and hanging out with the guy who I married, or Maharaji married me to, I should say. And so I was smoking as sort of a social thing to do, right? But I sort of wanted to quit. They were really disgusting little things. So when I walked into the ashram one day, Maharaji called me over and he said, Parvati, stop smoking beedies. And so I immediately, handed over my pack to somebody else. And, after lunch, he called me up and he congratulated me on having stopped smoking. And he said, I'm the CID of the heart. The CID is the Indian equivalent of the CIA. So it was sort of like he's saying, I know what was in your heart. And so I think of him that way many times, that he's the CID of the heart. And he knows what it is you need. He knows what your heart is yearning for. And there he is for you.
I love that. It's beautiful. You don't feel so alone. I think in this world, it's so easy to feel alone and to feel stressed and not supported and have to hide parts of yourself. And to have a moment like that, it can carry on for a lifetime. And I think, when people ask about a lot of these dreams, they want them all the time. It's like a drug, right? Like they just want that kick. But, sometimes you only have one in your entire life, but that's all you need.
Right, exactly.
Right.
I know. I have a story by somebody who said in the beginning, when she first met Maharaji through her dreams, and she had a lot of dreams. She had them very, very frequently. And she was very I don't know how to say this. She, in the beginning, she was like, sort of like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? Type of thing. But he kept coming. He kept coming over and over and over again until finally she was just a completely smitten devotee. Right. And then at that point, sort of the honeymoon was over. And now she goes, now I keep waiting for another dream. Pete Holmes, the comedian, wrote the foreword for the book. He's a longtime Maharaji person, but he grew up very fundamentalist Christian. And he and his wife, Val, both. And Val has a wonderful story in the book where they've come to the retreat in Maui that Ram Dass used to do. And the child is sick. So here she is in Maharaji's place. She says, Maharaji, I don't want to test you, but please, I need help right now with my kid. Because I guess testing God is like a big no-no, at least in the fundamentalist Christian world. And so people have this strange feeling like if they're asking something of Maharaji or of whoever, that it's not the right thing to do, that you're somehow testing them. But really, that's what we want to do. We want to bring our whole selves into the presence of the divine. And so there is nothing to hide, because the divine knows what's in your heart.
Absolutely. I think not being attached to how those things come. Like
Right.
I do that stuff all the time. You make requests. I need support with this. Like
Help
me, please.
Help me.
Figure this out for me. Like,
Right.
that's, but part of that is, and who are you asking? Who knows? Sometimes you know what I mean? People who are skeptics or non-believers or people that are non-denominational or even consider themselves atheists. I've had conversations with them about the same thing. Like, what's the harm in even just verbalizing? I mean, there's benefit to even just having the vulnerability to say, I don't even know who I'm talking to, but I need support, or I need to acknowledge that I have a weakness right now in terms of my faith is lacking, or I'm not trusting the way of life. And so sometimes saying that is a huge part of the battle, I guess, or the journey.
Yeah. It's it's like, here I am. This is who it is. This is who I am right now. And that's what I meant earlier when I said, Maharaji said, okay, love everyone. The first person you've got to love is yourself. Yeah, I think it was Ramana Maharshi who said, God, Guru, and self are one. So when you think about that, when you're asking something that you think is external for help, what you're really going is, in my highest self, please come forward and take care of this. It's the intuitive place that you don't need to be going to an external deity for. Some people can find it just sitting outside under a tree. They don't need anything else. It's just like you go in far enough, you're coming to that place where God, Guru, and self are one. And Guru literally just means remover of darkness. And what people don't understand is that there's a difference between, the Upaguru, which are all of our teachers, the ones who show us the way, right? Like I have a meditation teacher. You can have a golf guru, you can have whatever it is. And then there's the Sat Guru. And Sat Guru means truth. Sat is truth. So that's the one that removes the darkness of ignorance and leads you into the truth of who you really are, not of who they are, but of who you are. And that when Maharaji shows up in your dream, he's showing you that you have internally, through your own intuitive openness, your own ability to open, have allowed yourself to experience that in the form that comes to you in your dream. But it's all one. That's what he kept saying. Sub-ek, it's all one. God, Guru, and self. It's all one.
Wow, this has been a beautiful conversation. I so enjoyed just hearing your stories and like sharing my own. It's one of the first times on air sharing that. So it's just really nice to be able to just be in this moment together. And I really appreciate you being open to continuing to talk to us about this. And hopefully you have some more books too. I'm guessing these stories are not going to stop. They're just going to continue to come your way.
As soon as a book comes out, I start getting messages from people going, oh, if I'd only known you were doing this, I've got such a good story.
I'm actually really curious before we wrap up. Has there ever been a story that you heard that almost you're like, come on? You just almost couldn't believe it yourself?
Well, the wildest one, which is in the book, is this boy, Paul, from Australia, who as a young child was really severely sexually and emotionally abused by groups of men. And at one point, he's like 9, almost 10 years old, and he's coming home from school one day, and the house looks like it's exploded, like a bomb went off inside. And he's really scared. He's alone. His parents aren't home yet. And a man shows up and wraps him in a blanket and says, it's all done. And then he doesn't remember anything after that. But after that, he was never touched again. And then many years later, because he'd been in such a severely abusive situation growing up, he winds up marrying somebody who abuses him. And 20 years into the marriage with 2 kids, finally gets divorced, moves into a high rise in Australia. He said, beautiful, mountains on one side, ocean on the other, a really beautiful place. And all of a sudden he finds himself with one leg over the balcony and about to put the other leg over the balcony. And all of a sudden he feels this big rush of love coming towards him. And he backs off going, I don't understand it, but I'm loved. Somebody loves me. And, it's just this, and he suddenly goes, well, what about the boys? I mean, he hadn't even thought about them, when he was about to jump. So anyway, after the divorce and many years later, he gets into a relationship with a woman in the States. And at one point when he's visiting the States, he sees for the very first time a picture of Maharaji, whether it's on a book cover or a magazine, I don't remember where. And he goes, oh my God, that's the blanket. Oh my God, that's the man. And I'm interviewing him on Zoom from Australia. And he goes, I'll never forget that blanket. He goes, I'll never forget the way it felt. I'll never forget the smell of it. I'll never forget that day. He goes, it was September 11th, 1973. And I look at him and I go, do you know what that day is? He goes, no. I goes, that's the day Maharaji left his body. And that's the day he showed up to this little boy and said, it's all done. And never again was abused. So that to me was a pretty remarkable story.
Wow. I look forward to continuing to read. I said I've only read the Dreams chapter so far.
Well, read some of the others.
Oh, yeah, I'm going. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'll be looking for that. And so one of our last questions that we have for guests on the podcast is, since you really haven't had a dream yet of Maharaji since he's died, what dream would you want to have tonight if you could of Maharaji?
Anything where I felt his presence. I mean, there's just nothing like that love. There's no other energy in the world that I can think of that I would want to be in the heart of than that totally unconditional, non-judgmental, all-encompassing feeling of being home, being safe, being loved, being seen for who you are.
Well, I hope I have that dream too.
Yeah.
We all can have that dream tonight. So I just want to thank you again so much. And people, like I said, if you love, Grief Dream, this is a really good book. And it's a great introduction also, not only to the dreams, but Maharaji. And you can learn more about him. But I think you'd probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most people in different religions with different types of gurus or teachers, Christians with Jesus, I would think have maybe similar dreams based on those individuals too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so Sabek, same
Sabek,
place.
all one.
Yeah, right. Maharaji used to say over and over again, Hanuman and Christ are one.
That's one of my favorite teachings because I grew up Christian and said I had a great love for Jesus and still do. And then you just realize that there's other places that can open you up where there's limitations based on teachings or based on how you were taught. to really open your heart a little bit more. So I just want to say thank you for writing the 2 books, and I'm excited to read the 3rd book, the Isabella one.
It's funny, even though it's a children's book, it's still based on the basic spiritual values of, love and kindness.
I would expect nothing less from you. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for bringing this into the world. You are doing your service by sharing, this kind of space with people. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed this conversation, and really touched and just inspired by your work and your being as a person, and appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.